We're going to look now at our second doctrine, which is the doctrine of sin. And we will cover this for 6 class periods, the doctrine of sin. And we will look at the biblical concepts of sin for 2 days. We will look at the nature of sin for a couple days. And then we will look at the Christian and his sin for a couple days. Mark them and avoid them. Whose is this? I know whose it is. I'm sure it's the person that graded it and sent it up. I am sure of that. It can't be the person who's it. All right. Doctrine of sin. And so this is the theological term is Hamartiology. Hamartios, that's Greek word for sin, hamartios. So Hamartiology for the doctrine of sin. And we'll pray and give a little introduction here. Jared, would you pray for us?
Dear Lord, I thank you for this day. Lord, I thank you for all that you've done for us. I pray that you be with us in this class period, Lord. Help us to learn from your word. Pray that you be with us on a Sunday, Lord. It's the last day of the push. I just pray that you give us a good day, Lord. Working hard. Pray that we'll see souls saved. That you give us a good rest of the day. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, so let me just give you a little account that happened less than 2 years ago. There was a man who went to I guess you'd say a convention of Christians. In other words, we'll use that term for the first few minutes here to more for the idea of those that are involved in some form of Christianity. Okay, so maybe we would call it Christendom, or this range of churches that follow Christ or claim to be followers of Christ. So this is a large group known as the Anglicans. All right, the Anglicans, the Church of England, the Episcopalians here in America, a break off from the Roman Catholic Church because the king wanted a divorce and didn't get it from the Pope. So I said, I'll start my own church. King Henry VIII, then the Anglican Church, definitely not started because of some theological stand for the truth. But actually the opposite. And so the Church of England became a state church, obviously, in England, and still is today. And it spread really around the world where the British Empire spread. So we have branches of the Church of England, or Anglicanism, around the world because of the spread of the British Empire. And so a couple years ago, Anglicans in Australia got together. And they were trying to find a way, find common ground so that they could stay united. They didn't want their church to split apart, as it looked like it was heading that way. And so a man went there and listened in as these Anglicans are trying to find common ground to stay together and to see if it could be done. During the course of their discussions, they found out some pretty stark differences in theology for those that were there. And during the course of the discussion, the idea, I'll read a little bit, the idea that all men and women are lost in sin and need to be saved, and that without this they'd face God's judgment, was ridiculed by many in that gathering. Okay. Some there wanted to define sin as brokenness as opposed to moral guilt, and did not want to tie together sin with accountability to God. So sin, as the Bible speaks of it, didn't make sense to these people anymore. Five issues came up during this discussion about sin. One is that in the past 50 years, a huge cultural shift has taken place with regard to the understanding of three words. Duty, obedience, and what's the other one here? Oh, accountability. These three words were addressed. Now, it was pointed out that those are good. Those are not bad words. Those are good words. Those are words that we can find biblical verses, Bible verses to back up. Okay? Accountability. We're all going to give account of ourselves to God, right? Accountability. And we are to be accountable to each other within the local church. That's part of the fellowship and the local church ideas. Accountability with each other. Well, duty. We heard it preached not long ago. It's required in stewards that a man be found faithless. It's duty. It's requirement. And obedience. We just read that in Romans 6:16 through 18, correct? These are Bible words. Those words were brought up with regard to sin. Once considered healthy, good, appropriate words for thinking and behavior to Christian. Today, these words were discussed as being oppressive, inhibiting, and even destructive. If you're honest with yourself, you will understand, or you have seen this reaction to these type of words in either the churches you've been in or in ministries where you're working with people, trying to help them grow as disciples. Okay? For a disciple of Christ, these are Bible words. These are words to attain to strive toward. But in today's world, due to the redefinition of sin, accountability, that's oppressive. Don't ask me to see what's on my social media, right? Our MySpace, when that was a big thing, that was the thing. This is mine. MySpace, not your space. Keep your eyes off that. Let me have my secret place. I'm really excited that one nasty website, thousands of people got exposed. That needs to happen. Okay? So accountability, duty, that inhibits me. Duty means I don't get to do what I want to do. And when I don't feel good, I still have to do it. When I don't feel like it, I still have to do my duty, my responsibility. And obedience. My favorite illustration with obedience, and I don't overuse it, but in my dad's work, he had a repair shop, car repair, and he had a mechanic. And he was not listening to what my dad was the boss, what he said. So finally, my dad said, "Hey, listen, I don't want to hear all your reasons. I just want you to obey." And the man said, "I am not a dog. I don't have to obey." And that's the mindset. Obedience is what a dog does. Not a human being, let alone he's an employee, getting paid by his employer. Have you seen that attitude at your workplace before? I know I did all the time. Hopefully I don't see it here too much. Got a couple coworkers I work with. Oh my goodness. So, what changed this? What made this how did these words get back? Here's why. You got to listen to this stuff that's around today. Because today's Christians have rediscovered the doctrines of grace. That's what's happened. We've rediscovered grace. So then, rediscovering these doctrines of grace, accountability, no, let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about duty. Let's not talk about obedience. I'm not saying that many of these people that preach this say these are bad, but they're not going to talk about it. I'm not going to preach about that. So it ends up being a flight from all talk about sin. You're just not going to hear it when you turn into the TV preacher. Not going to hear about it. Not going to hear about sin in a lot of Baptist churches today. You're just not going to hear strong preaching. You're not going to hear clear preaching. I'll just say it like that, on sin. Secondly, another reason, so this is imagined legalism. Sin, any type of sin, or preaching on sin, or accountability, or duty, or obedience, that's all just legalism. When we know grace, that trumps all of this. Wipes it all out. Secondly is redefining sin by liberal theologians. Now, liberal theologians, 19th, 20th century, have changed the meaning of sin into some social ills, such as alienation from each other. Our classes are at war with each other, class warfare. That's the real sin. We're alienated from our environment. All right? The destruction of our environment, that's the real sin. Feminist theology has taken another step and said sin takes different forms in those with power as opposed to those without. Men exhibit this power or control over women. That is the real problem. That's the real sin. That's feminist theology. And then process theology. Anything that stifles the development of the human race. That is sin. So it's redefining what sin is. Those issues are the topic of sermons in many churches in Christianity today. Thirdly is the rejection of a historical fall of man. We talked about this with the doctrine of man, didn't we? Not many, quote, theologians as a whole today will take Genesis 3 literally. Evolution has got them to redefine or reject the reality of Genesis chapter 3. Another reason why sin is vanishing as a Christian doctrine is because there's this influence on original goodness and trying to affirm the world. To affirm the world rather than to reject the world as a system against God. Affirming, that's a new word today, isn't it? We are an affirming church. Simply means we welcome LGBT, and then Pastor Vogel's PQRS, WXY is the alphabet, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, beta, aleph, gamma, aleph. I mean, we're all all right, so I think there's one place that has 46 gender identifications. Did you see that? I don't know where it was at. I heard it was 46 different gender identifications. This is confusion, isn't it? And where sin reigns, confusion reigns. So this is affirming the world, engaging the world constructively. Why? For so long, the Christian voice has just been negative. And this makes it hard for us to be heard. The Christian voice is negative. We don't get heard. So we need to affirm the world. One of our members recently was at the funeral of a co-worker in a United Church of Christ church. This is the old Unitarian Universalists that have had a hard time keeping their tax-exempt status because their statement of faith is basically nothing. They just are on the search for truth. That's what they state. And so anyway, in this church, big, beautiful church, they have the offering envelopes, like the bulletin, and then this other flyer. He pulled the flyer out, said, we are something and an affirming church. If you identify as LGBTQ, you can attend our church, you can be a member, you can serve in any ministry of our church, you can be a deacon, right down the line. Okay? So affirming the world. Okay? That's what happens when we let sin get redefined. Okay? And then fifthly, TV teaches us this. Why is sin vanishing as a doctrine? Because there's this romantic view of sin in culture today, and that is the tragic hero. The deeper the flaw of a person, the more engaging his character is. And so doesn't Hollywood like to glamorize the bad person? The person with the lowest morals? They glamorize that person, make a hero out of him, very often. So this romantic view of sin, and this is done through literature. Literature often, right? The movie that glorifies and gives you sympathy for a mob boss, or the mafia, while he's in the middle of it. Is that manly or is that sinful? What is that? Well, it depends on what we're using to judge. What's our discerner based on? So this romantic view of sin. What's the reality behind all this? Sin has been vanishing as a doctrine. What's the real issue? I'll just summarize it. It's Psalm 14:1. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Once God is not in man's thought, man's foolishness is left free to roam. You have to slow down. You have to stop writing and think about this for a second, because it's a little bit deep. People who do not take God seriously find it very difficult to see the seriousness of not taking God seriously. I'll say it again. People who do not take God seriously find it very difficult to see the seriousness of not taking God seriously. Our sinfulness gets in the way of seeing our sinfulness. This is the blindness effect of sin, the Bible talks about, right? Sin blinds. Samson had this problem, didn't he? Sin blinded him. Here's Delilah, a Philistine, not hiding the fact that she's a Philistine. Several times he got caught. He was there when she deliberately tried to trick him. And he kept doing the same thing. Why? Sin blinds. He stopped taking God seriously, and so he stopped seeing the seriousness of not taking God seriously. And what's the inevitable judgment of that mindset? Is judgment. God's judgment. This is the reality. Romans 1, we won't read it, but you remember the downward spiral of sin in Romans chapter 1? Remember that? Well, it didn't start at the worst. It started with, God's not in their mind. And then down it goes. Sin is redefined. A challenge for us is the fact that we define what we believe about sin by our lifestyle, by how we live. Our attitude about this tells us what we believe about sin. And again, these three words, for a person that wants to serve God and be a disciple, those are wonderful words. Those are great words. But even among Christians, even among our circles, so to speak, we have times when this word, try to talk to somebody about, let's increase this because we see some problems here. Ooh, no. That's mine. You can't see that. You can't see that. What about doing your duty? What about being faithful? Well, man, with this, excuse, right? And obedience. Just simple obedience. That's for kids. That's the mindset. That's for kids. The world doesn't even want kids to obey, do they? You parent like you're a friend. These are good words. We get away from these three words. We look at them as oppressive, inhibiting, destructive. We rediscover the doctrines of grace. We are practically redefining the sin in our own lives. So we're going to go over the doctrine of sin. We're going to look at what the Bible says about it in the Old and New Testament. But our challenge for you is this. don't let sin get redefined in your life practically. Okay, very easy to do. We're no better in practice then than the Anglicans, right, who are wrong in their theology. All right, so we're talking here about the doctrine of sin. Roman numeral number 1, the biblical concepts of sin. And today we're going to look at sin in the Old Testament. Sin in the Old Testament. We've got several words we're going to go through and define, and a lot of passages we're going to read. This description of sin in the Old Testament today and on Tuesday in the New Testament is kind of a standard in theology, given by Charles Ryrie in his Systematic Theology, and other writers on theology have followed suit by beginning their discussion of sin with this description. So this is an Old Testament description of sin. Now, there's a lot of points here. There's 8 or 9 points. And we're still only talking about one thing. And the reason why that is because sin is a tool of the devil. And the devil has many wiles, not just 1 or 2. He has a big bag of tricks. And so sin is shown in the Old Testament from all these different angles, all these different ways. Why? The only reason I can think is so that we are prepared and we're armed and we're aware of all the different wiles of the devil and the different ways that he gets at us, that he will use to trip us up, that our flesh will tempt us, and the world will allure us. And so this idea of sin, all right, all these different angles, all these different aspects, and God saw fit to show us and to use many different words to describe sin. Why? Because it's chaotic. It's an attack from multiple fronts. It's not the Civil War battle, right? Line up, go. See who has more guys standing at the end. It's not that. It's more like today's warfare, right? The war on terror. It would be nice if it was really concrete, right? We went in, we beat them, we won. Not quite like that, is it, right? I heard about Al-Qaeda. They kind of were sprung up all over, right? And now they're kind of down. Now ISIS, right? They're kind of spread. That's probably a little better picture of what sin is really like. All right, so let's take our time here today and go through, looks like 8 Old Testament words defining sin. All right, so what I'll do is give the transliteration of the Hebrew word. I know you don't come here to learn Hebrew, but these are based on that, and then we'll give the English usage for it and try to understand these various concepts. Roman numeral number 1, the biblical concepts of sin, letter A, Old Testament. All right, number 1. Number 1. We have C-H-A-T-A, and this word for sin, which means to miss the mark. Miss mark. All right, this, underneath this, I'll give you a couple points. This is the basic word for sin. It's found about 522 times in the Old Testament, meaning to miss the mark of holiness, or to hit the wrong mark of sin. So this word is illustrated for us. Let's look at Judges 20, verse 16. Judges chapter 20, verse 16. This word is, we've got a real live illustration for this word in a passage where we might not think that it would be found at. So we got here these men, among all this people, Judges 20:16, there were 700 chosen men left-handed. All right, so who's this is their favorite passage in the Bible right now. Yeah, Meadow, anybody else? Wow, I thought it's 1 out of 10. Percentages are down. What's up? All right, so left-handed. This could mean that they are naturally left-handed. It could also mean that they were lame in their right hand. All right, battles, brutal back in these hand-to-hand and the swords and the shields and the clubs. Could mean that these are soldiers that have learned to use their left hand. Could be either way there. So these are chosen men left-handed. Everyone could sling stones at a hair breadth and not miss. Miss there is this Hebrew word kata. To miss. Right? These guys were so skilled that they could hit the mark. Sin is when we miss the mark. Exodus 20:20. Let's read that. Devontae will have to read Exodus chapter 20 and verse 20. And right after the Ten Commandments.
And Moses said unto the people, Fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that you sin not.
Okay, so the Ten Commandments were given, and God's here to prove you that ye sin not. Don't miss the mark. The Old Testament mark here, the Ten Commandments. Keeping the Ten Commandments. The Trin young ruler knew that, and he thought that he had. Right? He thought he had hit the mark every time for all of his life, and the Lord had to show him otherwise. All right, so we've got Exodus 20:20. The Hebrew word chata means translated sin, to miss the mark. Let's look at Proverbs 8:36. Proverbs 8:36. Rick will have you read that.
He that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death.
All right, so there another word for sin. Of course, as we mentioned, 522 times. There's lots of references to that. This sin relates to the character of God. This sin relates to an action, a thought against the character of God. Secondly, number 2, I love this Hebrew word here. I love to rub it in. R-A. Got a friend who I remind about this. You have two choices there when I see Rod. You're one of two things. A, you are the Hebrew word for wicked, or B, in Egyptology, you are a sun god. Do you want to be sin or do you want to be pagan? Which is your choice? There's nothing there that's going to come out positive for the Christian, I don't think. All right, this word means wicked. This is the basic word for wicked, found 444 times in the Old Testament. This can mean calamity or ruin, R-U-I-N. It's further developed with the idea of wretchedness or adversity. It's never translated as the word sin. Never translated sin. Synonymous, I think, but not like that. Let's look at Isaiah 45:7. Isaiah 45:7. Josh will have you read Isaiah 45:7.
I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create all evil. I, the Lord, do all these things.
All right, so we will talk about that idea of creating evil there. God created evil. What about that? It's interesting there. This word has a wide range of meaning, the word evil. That word evil is never rendered as sin. God's not the author. This verse does not teach God is the author of sin. Evil. This word is translated calamity, adversity, grief, affliction, misery, trouble, wretchedness. All right. Often those things are brought to bring a person to repentance, to bring them to the knowledge of sin. Right? God is not the author of sin, though. So wicked. God made sorrow, wretchedness, as the fruits of sin. Soul that sinneth, it shall die. God didn't sin, right? God didn't make that soul sin, but the soul that sinneth, it shall die. There's fruits to our sin. There is calamity that comes from our sin. Let's look at Genesis 3:5. Genesis 3:5, and Shem will have you read that. Genesis 3:5.
For God know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as God, knowing good and evil.
All right, knowing good and evil on that day, and many other references. Number three is the word Pasha. This has the idea of transgression, right? Remember that Old Testament word, transgression? And transgression has added really the idea of to rebel. The basic meaning here is to rebel, and the word transgression is actually a Latin word, trans, T-R-A-N-S. All right, that's part of it. What does that mean? What are some to go across, right? To move across, we could say. And the second part of that word, has here of movement, to move across. Trans, across, aggression, radio, move, so move across. Move across. So the meaning here is a violation or breach of the law. Violation or a breach of the law. This word relates to the law of God. This person has transgressed. They've broken the law. They've broken God's law. The deliberate doing of that is rebellion. Okay. Number 4, A-W-O-N. Here we get our word iniquity. Iniquity. Both the ideas of iniquity and guilt are in this word. What about the word iniquity? What does the word iniquity mean? Iniquity means lawlessness, wickedness, crookedness, or perverseness, distortion. Lawless, wickedness, crookedness, perverseness, distortion. This is iniquity. Isaiah 53:6. That's a lot of words there, isn't it? That's a pretty heavily defined word. Isaiah 53:6. Jared will have you read this verse. Isaiah 53:6. Let's look for the word iniquity in this verse.
All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all.
The Lord laid on Jesus Christ our lawlessness, our wickedness, our perverseness, our crookedness, the distortion of what's right. He laid that on Jesus. All right, so there's words for sin for sure here in this passage, and one of them is iniquity. The Lord had that laid on him. Let's look at Numbers 15:30. Dustin, Numbers 15:30 and 31. Numbers 15:30 and 31.
But the soul that doth aught presumptuously, whether he be born in the land or a stranger, the same reproacheth the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from among the people. Because he hath despised the word of the Lord, and hath broken his commandment, that soul shall utterly be cut off, his iniquity shall be upon him.
His iniquity shall be upon him. His perverted way, his corrupt course is going to be on him, right? That's on me, right? Guy makes a mistake. Man, that's on me. Our sin is on us. Our sin is on us. Get the fruit of our own way. All right, number 5. Number 5, S-H-A-G-A-G. And this concept is, this word is translated err, E-R-R. This means to go astray, as a sheep might wander away, or as a drunkard might stagger out of his way, out of the right way. Let's look at Isaiah 28:7 to see this word illustrated. Isaiah 28:7. Barrett will have you read that. Isaiah 28:7. Didn't win many sword drills in the day there, did you, Barrett? Like, man, beat me again. It's all right, it's all right.
They also have erred through wine, and through strong drink are out of the way. The priest and the prophet have erred through strong drink. They are swallowed up of wine. They are out of the way through strong drink. They err in vision. They stumble in judgment.
All right, so err we have throughout there, and the illustration here is a drunkard erring or stumbling out of the way. So those that go astray, whether it seems innocent like a sheep just kind of wandering away, or whether it's a drunkard who brings that error and judgment upon himself by what he brings into himself. Either way, truth behind this is that the person that erred was responsible to know where he should have been going. We like to turn sin, and this type of sin, into an innocent mistake. All right. I know no one here has ever gotten pulled over by a policeman for a traffic violation. So you're not going to relate to what I'm saying here. And really, I'm just relating it secondhand from somebody else that I heard it from once somewhere. Was reading about something. Well, you know, you don't do yourself a lot of favors to tell the policeman, I didn't know it was down to 35.
Sure.
I didn't know. They love that, don't they? Like, oh, I'm so sorry. What am I doing? Let's go get some lunch and talk about this. Forgive me for embarrassing you. It's not what happens. The fact that we didn't know is not the policeman's fault, right? But our fault. Right? I didn't know. So, Leviticus 4:2. Let's look back at Leviticus 4:2. Trevor will have you read that. Leviticus 4:2.
Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which ought not to be done, and shall do against any of them.
And then it continues on the fact that that person still paid for his sin. He still paid for his sin. Okay. Sin through ignorance. Whew! No responsibility. No, that's not the way it is. Sin through ignorance. Get unignorant. Maybe would be the way to deal with that. All right, and other verses deal with that too. Number 6. A-S-H-A-M. This word has the idea of guilt. May be considered an effect of sin, but this particular word was almost always used in connection with the tabernacle. Let's look at Leviticus 4:13, since we're right there. And Ben will have you read that, Leviticus 4:13.
And if the whole congregation of Israel sin through ignorance, and the thing be hid from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord, concerning things which should not be done, and are guilty.
And are guilty. All right, so this word is used with intentional and unintentional guilt with the sin offerings. Number seven is a variation of number 1, R-A-S-H-A. This word is translated also as wicked. And we will find this word in Psalm, in Ezekiel, particularly, another word for wicked. Number 8, T-A-A-H. This word means to wander. To wander. Or to go astray. This is deliberate wandering. All right? Psalm 119:21. Psalm 119:21. Alan will have you read Psalm 119, verse 21.
Thou hast rebuked the proud that are cursed, which do err from thy commandments.
All right, so to err, to wander, often used in the context of wine or women, right? Used in those two ways, these two contexts often. Ezekiel 44:10, Devontae, Ezekiel 44:10.
And the Levites that are gone away from you, when Israel went astray, which went astray away from me after their idols, they shall even bear their iniquity.
All right, so the Levites went away, and the nation went away, wandered away. Wandered away. Some conclusions then about the Old Testament concept of sin, some conclusions. First, sin may take many forms. Sin may take many forms. Secondly, because of the variety of words used, an Israelite could be aware of the particular form his sin took. Unfortunately today, we do good to think of our sin. We do well to confess our sin. God wanted the Israelites to recognize the particular form of their sin, the actual form that their sin took, and what that meant. God took sin seriously, and He wanted His people to take sin seriously. Fourthly, sin is that which is contrary to the established law, ultimately disobedience to God. Sin is that which is contrary to established law, ultimately disobedience to God. And then lastly, disobedience involved both positive and negative ideas. Sins of commission or sins of omission. Deliberate sins or sins that I didn't do what I should have done. Sins of omission. Sins, the positive and the negative side, both there. So in the Old Testament, this is quite a variety of aspects of what breaking God's laws and God's commands were. All right, we have sin, we have wickedness, transgression, to go across, rebellion, iniquity, erring, guilt, wickedness, or wandering away. And then on Tuesday, we will look similarly at the New Testament, and we'll find about the same number of sins, same words for sin used in the New Testament.